U.S. gun sales continue to skyrocket. From 2012 to 2020, the number of guns produced has doubled every year. In 2020, there were 611 mass shootings and over 11 million guns made. And according to the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco and Firearms, the number of guns produced doubled every year from 2010 to 2020. So our question, this debate, is do more guns really make us safer? Well, look at this. In the Washington Post, columnist Paul Waldman writes, if gun advocates, a group that includes pretty much the entire GOP, are correct in their oft-stated assertion that more guns means more safety, shouldn't we be enjoying a paradise of security with crime plunging to never-before-seen lows? Obviously, that is not what's happening. So joining me to discuss an issue that matters to every single one of us, CNN political commentator Scott Jennings, former special assistant to President George W. Bush, along with Shannon Watts, the founder of Moms Demand Action. She is also the author of Fight Like a Mother, How a Grassroots Movement Took on the Gun Lobby and Why Women Will Change the World. Welcome to you both. And I want to just start off by saying, I know you both agree that mass shootings are horrible. People should not be losing their lives in these mass shootings, right, in the wake of what we just saw in Buffalo. But Scott, I want to start with you on the heels of that op-ed. As a member of the GOP, I'll let you respond to that quote. Do you think more guns means more safety?
Well, I certainly think there are people in the United States who believe they need a gun for their own personal safety. In fact, it's one of the most commonly given reasons when you do surveys of gun owners. Why do you have a gun? And it's for personal safety. And as has been pointed out many times, we are in the midst of a national crime wave, and we're also in the midst of a national police shortage. And so there are certainly Americans who have constitutional rights available to them to carry guns for personal safety, and that's exactly what they do. Whether you want to talk about the micro or individual right to own guns versus the macro statistics, I guess, is part of this discussion. But as a Republican, as a conservative, if you support the Second Amendment, then you obviously support every individual's right to keep and bear arms. And if the reason is for personal safety, then that's the reason. And, that's a protected right.
Right, because Shannon, gun production has nearly tripled over the past 20 years. So what do you say to Scott, who's saying, look, this is people wanting to protect themselves as crime is surging? What do you say to that? Why do you think there is such increasing demand?
Well, I think what Scott and I both agree on is that there should be stronger gun laws in place. We are not opposed to the Second Amendment. Many of our volunteers are gun owners or their partners are gun owners. This is about restoring the responsibilities that should go along with gun rights. And I've been working on this as a full-time volunteer now for a decade. And what we have seen is that gun extremism has really taken root in the Republican Party. It started out with these armed extremists showing up at our meetings, and then they showed up at state houses and then at the Capitol on January 6th. And this extremism has really become part of the policy platform. And in fact, we are seeing gun manufacturers and their allies try to roll back things like a background check on every gun sale or gun safety training. And this crime wave that we're seeing is the logical outcome of having 400 million guns in a country with too few gun laws. And to the point of that op-ed, if more guns and less gun laws made us safer, we'd be the safest country in the world. Instead, we have a 25 times higher gun homicide rate than any peer nation. And I would just point out that in Buffalo, that horrific, tragic situation, there was an armed guard there. But unfortunately, a guard with a handgun is just no match for a white supremacist who's been radicalized online and who has easy access to semi-automatic rifles and ballistics gear. It just is not going to play out that way in the real world.
All right, there was a lot there, and Scott, I want to let you respond to that, but I do want to pick up on that number, approximately 400 million guns in circulation in the U.S., nearly half of all the privately owned guns in the world. That's not even counting so-called ghost guns. So, Scott, why does the U.S. need all these guns?
Well, the Constitution doesn't contemplate how many guns we need or we don't need. It just contemplates the individual right to keep and bear arms. And so it's obviously been deeply ingrained in our American culture since the founding, since the creation of the Constitution. You do have different gun laws by state. As I was listening to Shannon talk, I was thinking about this issue. You have people who commit the crimes, you have the guns that are involved, and then you have the policies that govern the people and the guns. In the case of Buffalo, one of the things that I've been most curious about is why the state's existing laws, the policies in place, didn't stop the person from having a gun. New York has a red flag law. He had spent time in a mental health facility. He had been flagged because he had expressed violent thoughts, wanted to murder someone and maybe even commit suicide. This was a case that was tailor-made, I think, when red flag laws were contemplated. So in this particular case, I think less about the gun itself and more about the person who had exhibited violent behavior and thoughts, been in a mental institution for a period, and the policy that didn't work. He also passed a background check, which makes me also wonder, what is it about the policies and the matrix of policies here that failed? And so, as I have contemplated this horrific shooting, that's what I've been wondering about. This guy fell through the cracks, and he should not have, based on the laws that were in place in the state of New York.
So what do you say to that, Shannon, that basically the tools that you were advocating for earlier, supporting stronger background checks, passing red flag laws, didn't prevent the shooting in Buffalo?
Well, I'll go back to what Scott was saying about the Constitution and how we have something no other nation does, which is the Second Amendment. But we also have something else no peer nation has, and that is a gun lobby. We have gun manufacturers who work very hard to influence the laws that are passed by lawmakers who are beholden to them. And that has completely changed the landscape of gun use in this country. The fact that this gunman was 18 years old and was able to legally buy a long gun in the state of New York, I think is egregious. And yet we're seeing the gun lobby go state by state and even work at a federal level to lower the age to buy a handgun. We know in this country that about 18% of all gun homicides are committed by mostly men ages 18 to 22. And they're only 4% of the population, right? So there's an issue. But I will also go back to what Scott said about the red flag law, which I know both he and I support fully. Red flag laws are only as useful as the way that they're implemented. And so we do need to make sure that when a law is passed, that police and citizens know that it's available, they know how to use it. It's my understanding, as these details unfold, that this white supremacist was not adjudicated mentally ill, that he had not been charged with a crime. And so therefore, you do have to depend on red flags. And like Scott said, they're almost always warning signs, which is why we've passed red flag laws now in nearly 20 states and Washington, D.C. The data shows that they work, that they are constitutionally sound, and they really should be in place at a federal level.
And Scott, we have seen a number of shootings where a person with a gun did not stop the shooting, like in Buffalo and Parkland. You talk about the background check and the red flag laws, not stopping the shooting, but at the same time, there was a security guard who unfortunately lost his life, who did not stop the shooting. So if more guns make us safer, as Republicans have argued, why haven't those shootings been prevented?
Well, I don't know why this shooting wasn't prevented in this particular case. I do know what he wrote in his manifesto, the shooter, and that is he was hoping that the gun laws in place in New York would make it easier for him to commit the atrocity, because he thought the fact that people weren't allowed to open carry would make it harder for someone to stop him. He wrote that down. That's his words, not mine. And so, look, I think that everybody here wants to come up with an answer to stop everybody all the time from doing these bad things. I think part of the issue is these are individual situations. You have individual laws in individual states. The way those people and guns interact with those laws are different from state to state. But at the core of all this are evil people who were infected by an evil ideology, and taking a gun out of a law-abiding citizen's hand is not going to stop that evil person from committing an atrocity necessarily. There are policies, as Shannon and I have agreed here tonight, that could probably protect law-abiding citizens while stopping people who shouldn't have guns from having them. And that's what to me, if we're not going to get stuck in the mud here, where we're going to have to focus is on policies that protect the law-abiding citizens of the United States under the Constitution, but stop the violent people who clearly should have been flagged. And to me, that's where we have a path forward. But taking guns out of the hands of people who have committed no crime and have no reason to have them taken away, it's going to grind this debate to a halt, and as it usually does in Congress, as we've seen over the last several years.
So what do you say to that, Shannon? Because from what I heard from you, from what I know about your work, you don't want to take away guns from law-abiding citizens, right? You just want to make sure that guns don't end up in the wrong person's hands. So what do you say to Scott? That
That's
really,
exactly
though,
right.
at the end of the day, it's about the person and it's not the gun, as you heard him say. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, this is where we part ways, right? This idea that nothing can stop a criminal from getting a hold of a gun is a fallacy. We know most illegal guns, or many of them, come from cars. They're stolen from homes and cars, and the gun lobby, the NRA, fights us every step of the way to force the reporting of lost and stolen guns. And I've been doing this work for a decade, and I've never seen the NRA support a single common sense gun law. And we're not talking about taking people's guns away. I think where Scott is right is that he points out that our nation is a patchwork of gun laws. We are all only as safe as the closest state with the weakest gun laws. And there is some reporting that this white supremacist gunman went to another state to get a high capacity magazine. He's right. He lives right near Pennsylvania. So we do need federal laws in place that will keep us all safe. And when we look at states, and this is something our organization does, states with strong gun laws have less gun death, and states with weak gun laws have more gun death. Most of those run by Republicans. This is intuitive, but the data bears it out. So constantly saying there's nothing we can do to stop this gun violence is sort of absurd.